Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. No matter where you are in the world, what chaos is happening in your life today, we're happy to have you here. Welcome to Criticality Live, where we present all the things that are happening in cybersecurity, cutting through some noise, challenging some assumptions, and talking honestly about cybersecurity. Brought to you by the fine folks at Secure Nation. All right, enough about the intro. Let's get to the real reason why you're here. We have an amazing guest. So today's guest isn't just about tracking vulnerabilities. He's about how fast reality breaks your patch cycle. Patrick Garrity is a security researcher at VulnCheck. He's a relentless analyst of real world exploitation and one of the clearest voices calling out the gaps between what we think matters and what attackers are actually exploiting. Because we both know that those are two vastly different things. He's the mind behind VulnCheck's State of Exploitation report that doesn't just care about the theory, severity scores, or how comfortable our dashboards look. It cares about the proof, evidence, and weaponization as it relates to time to impact. Patrick kind of lives at the intersection of exploit development, threat intelligence, and where vulnerabilities are actually exploited before the CVEs are even published. Where network edge devices are forgotten software, become the front door, and where defenders often react to a fight that's already moved on to the next place. And oh, by the way, he does all this with the energy of a 20-year-old skateboarding hack. He's fast, precise, and absolutely allergic to bullshit. So if your vulnerability management still assumes you have time, this conversation is about to ruin your day and possibly play. So with that, welcome, Patrick.
What's up? Hey everyone, it's great to be here, and that was an amazing intro. Yeah, I try and keep the energy of the 20-year-olds. I'm 42, but I'm always skating with the young guns, which is fun, and then get to work with a bunch of people of all ages, which is great. So it's awesome to be here.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. So we'll kind of dive right in. For the first part of the show, we kind of like to talk about your origin story. So before VulnCheck, before exploit data and reports, what was the first moment that made you realize how broken our assumptions about vulnerability risk actually are?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah, I transitioned from a lot of different roles in building security products. So, I went from multi-factor authentication, which was in its heyday in like 2012 to 2020. And then I worked for a small company, Blue Mira, in the SIM space, more on detection and detecting things happening. But I think the big change and shift in attacker behavior was really like 2021 when we started to see some of the exchange vulnerabilities being exploited really broadly, and then I actually wasn't working for a hot second when Log4j happened. I missed that. I had like a 6 month sabbatical
Lucky
of all
you.
things,
Yeah, I was
but
just going to say.
but right after that, I got a job at Nucleus Security, and I was like, oh, Vuln data. Like, it seems like with all what we are seeing at Blue Mira, this is a real problem that's on the rise. And that was kind of the transition where it was like, okay, vulnerability management has been kind of neglected for the last couple decades. It's like a Tenable or Qualys scan, and maybe you do some stuff, and you use criticality. I liked how you said that in the intro of like, I have some comments on criticality we can talk about too. But I came to Nucleus, and I actually came on as a VP of marketing. And my number one thing when Sysakev came out, the known exploited vulnerability catalog, and I just started looking at it, and I was like, how do we help translate this into a way that people can understand? What are all the bad things they should go fix in their environment? And that was really a transition, and there still is a large transition of this mindset and thought from like, oh, I just look at CVSS scores and severities and do prioritization based on that. But now it's really an aspect of like, no, you should be focused on threat activity and what the threat actors are actually targeting and doing. And so that's where, like, for me, I transitioned from, you know, being a marketer, a salesperson, or a sales engineer, or operations into like a full-time researcher. Um, and so, yeah, just curiosity of like, oh, what technologies are getting targeted the most? what are threat actors actually doing? This is relatively new. I mean, to me, this is like 3 years ago, I think, when maybe 3 or 4, when I started poking around vuln data. But mostly I started with curiosity and what was actually being exploited. And that kind of drove a lot of my research. But also the tailwinds of the attack vector switching from authentication attacks. MFA, they still are, but like MFA made it harder. So then threat actors switched to something else, which, exploitation is a logical next place to go. And so, yeah, that's a mouthful, but hopefully that provides some background and insight into how I landed into research and spending so much time on vulnerabilities and exploitation and threat actors.
Yeah. So a lot of people end up, insecurity by accident. You know, what problem were you originally trying to solve when you realized that exploitation was really the place that you wanted to be and not just the vulnerabilities being the thing that you cared about?
Yeah, so I think number one, when I came into this, like what was surprising is everyone's like, I'm trying to fix all the critical and high vulnerabilities. Like that is ingrained still. And I had a great conversation with Craig Lawson last night, actually, Gartner analyst. And he's been doing this for like 30 years. And it's just interesting to hear from someone with that broad long experience where it's like, no, like literally everyone is ingrained to focus on CVSS severity and fixing everything that's critical and high,
Mhm.
and it's not achievable. And so, like, you can't fix all the criticals and highs. That's like 50% of all vulns, roughly. I don't know, give or take. But I think for me, it's like, well, how do we actually help people focus on the right things and actually prioritize the things that, no questions asked, need to be patched, need to be remediated, need to be mitigated. And so that, that's where it's like, yeah, there's a lot of logic to that, but that conflicts actually with what everyone has been doing, and it's really, really hard to change culture. Like insecurity, like a lot of people have just been trained and it's ingrained to do the same thing, even when the same thing doesn't work. And so, naturally, I think for me, like that's a really interesting opportunity to research, to spend some time and understand why, and just get like intimately involved in helping other people understand like there's a different way and a different path forward with how they can focus on remediation, tech debt, and fixing the things that threat actors are actually taking advantage of.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
so
bring it. Go ahead, Kayla.
I was just going to say, so I put one of my previous organizations through the FedRAMP authorization process, and a big component is the risk management on vulnerabilities, right? And I really think what to your point that compliance has never really kept up with technology, especially the new technology risk that's out there. And you always
Yeah.
hear for your POAMs, you can't have POAMs for like critical and high vulnerabilities unless there's like a vendor who hasn't released a patch. So do you have any thoughts around that?
Yeah.
That
Yeah, absolutely. I've been through FedRAMP twice, myself.
reservation.
So we did FedRAMP
Yeah.
at Duo, and then we did FedRAMP at Nucleus.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, basically it's like fix everything almost, guidance. And I understand why the way that it is. Um, but ultimately it's like, yeah, we're prioritizing things based on an attributes of a vulnerability, not actually what's getting targeted or hit. And I think there's a balance. Like you certainly want to burn tech debt down. But on the other side, it's like, no, like when there's real threat associated with a vulnerability, something is known to be used, something's being looked at by threat actors, like, yeah, that needs to be prioritized. And compliance ultimately has good intentions, but it's not security. Like
Sure.
two completely different things. And I think ultimately, like we like the criticality ingrained in compliance makes it very difficult actually for people to do the right thing. And that's a unfortunate reality. Um, of the situation for most defenders.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point where we're so focused on fixing criticals and highs, but we don't take the time to step back and contextualize what those really are. If I have a critical vulnerability that's on a sign in kiosk and that's all it does and it can't do anything else, that's not as bad as the medium vulnerability I have on the Fortinet that's sitting at the edge of my perimeter.
Yeah.
And we have these things, and we brought up FedRAMP and CMMC. They're highly focused on fix the highs and criticals, don't care about context. So, with that, when did you realize that defenders really didn't understand how contextualization really changes the actual
Oh,
vulnerability related data?
well, I'm gonna get in the weeds a little bit. So when we talk about something like CVSS, that's a subjective determination by a human being. And there are reasons why someone might choose to change, CIA to high, medium, or low. There's reasons why they might opt towards something that might be lower or higher for different reasons, whether you're a security researcher writing the CVSS score or whether you're a vendor. And so, or your NIST. And so I think the first thing you have to understand is like, well, the whole basis of severity is CVSS, and it's incredibly subjective based on who's in the seat and what they're scoring, um, and whether they've actually even been trained. And so we're taking an output from like literally hundreds of individuals across different biases, right, to make a determination of a vulnerability's attributes that determines a criticality or score and/or score. It
Mhm.
factors in no aspect of threat. It doesn't consider whether there's, active use of this thing. And people could debate like you can modify the scores to get threat components, but still that has equal different number of flawed logic. Um, and so yeah, that's really the challenge is like I think we need to move away from a mindset of like we just need a score. And it's like, okay, we need to look and I think follow, some of the lead we're seeing out of Europe with some of their new regulations with something called the Cyber Resilience Act, where they're like, you must do these things when something is known to be exploited or something, has some aspect of threat associated with it. And so that's good, but yeah, that's kind of the reality of where we're at today is we're kind of stuck in the past.
Yeah, I completely concur with that. I've never been in your seat before, so I don't really know, what it takes to be a researcher. I've had security researchers that have worked for me, but outside of the research and the reporting, what keeps you personally motivated to stay this deep in this space instead of moving on to something that may be more polished or easier?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's fun. Like you get like the amount of people you get to interact with across the industry, the impact you get to make, the contributions you get to make and giving back are huge, and it's a really big problem. And so I look at that like, well, big problems take time to solve and time to change, the aspect of what we're focusing on doing. So to me, it's just a lot of fun, and the mountain of things to go research and explore is kind of infinite. And it's fun, but yeah, you start to realize like a lot of the nuances of how things are created, like who is responsible for them, why things are the way they are, and kind of break these down. And then the second question is like what can you actually control and do and impact. And so that's where a lot of like the work I've done and the work that even VulnCheck is doing as well is like, how do you balance, being a business, but also providing back to public good? Because ultimately, most this information regarding vulnerabilities, vulnerability disclosure, exploitation disclosure, like it is a team effort across the world in order to help get the right information to defenders so they actually know they should do something or take action on something. So I think for me, like that's a lot of the motivation. I think yes, there's also a lot of frustration with at times with like you're a researcher and you know you have difference of opinions, you have different perspectives, and so I think you know for me understanding that as well is something that you have to put yourself in other people's shoes and try and understand why they think the way they think or why they publish the research. But generally what I found is like if you keep an open mindset and collaborate with people and talk through these things like you learn a lot about you know vendor products and threat activity and threat actors and you know what actually is going on out there, and then how you get that information disseminated out as much as possible, so that people can be aware and can actually do something but also change their mindset of what they need to focus on.
So you spent a insane amount of time learning how attackers actually behave, not how we as defenders wish they would behave.
Yeah.
When you live that close to the reality, it kind of changes the way you think about things and how you want to do things in leadership and your decision making process. So I want to shift to from how we kind of got here to how what you've seen, what you've researched influence the way you lead. And what do you do when things like the data that you have contradicts our accepted narrative? How do you decide when to challenge leadership or when to just let it fall flat on its face?
Yeah, yeah, that's a balance. Yeah, I think for me, it's like first off, intimately understanding as much as you can and being open to that. And one of the reasons why I came to VulnCheck is we have a reverse engineering team. So how do I intimately understand that exploit development happens? How do detections get built? That sort of thing. So that's an interesting aspect where now you can go ask people that are working on it firsthand. I'm not an exploit developer. I'm not a reverse engineer, right? I think the second thing is you know probably the most interesting thing, and I was in the logs last night, like a drop like the Black Basta chat logs. One of the most fascinating things, like I think there's hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of lines of chats between the threat actor, you know, the people participating in Black Basta, which is a ransomware actor. And if you go there and see what they're actually doing, right? It helps you get an understanding. It's like, okay, first thing, they're a ransomware operator that targets large organizations. So what I learned is, wow, the number one URL that was presented in those chats is Zoom Info. They're using the same tooling that we're using for marketing. So the first thing they're looking at is, okay, what companies and organizations fit our criteria that we can go target that are going to pay us a ransom. Like usually it has to do with the amount of money that they have from an income perspective, and then industry, and then location. So you know that's a natural aspect of how they start. You know, once I've identified targets, then you start looking at technologies. What technologies are actually in their environment, and what technologies can be exploited. And generally speaking, the other thing is yeah, maybe there's some 0 days they're developing, or you know, looking to exploit products that haven't disclosed a vulnerability. But by and far, they're using the same information that defenders have. You know, vulnerabilities that have existed for days, months, years, public POC exploit code, tools like Metasploit, you know, you name it, off the shelf. And so you know, that gives you some insight as far as like what they're doing, how they're operating, and then also the psychology behind like their thinking and discussions of debating whether they should even hit a target because of ethical reasons a lot of times. And so like you know, for me it's just like fascinating to get a better understanding of that, because then you can say, okay, this is how they're going to operate, right? How do I protect myself against that? and it is utter chaos, like a complete chaos in those chat
Yeah.
logs. But um, you know, hey, what vulnerabilities, what technologies are they targeting? How are they going about that? And now that helps me understand as an individual, like what information can I disseminate that's going to help the defenders go take some actions that are going to be, meaningful, so they reduce their risk of ransomware. And largely it's network edge devices, device management, virtualization technologies, file transfer protocols, backups, right? Like, hey, figure out your security controls for those things. Make sure you have patch mitigation practices that are very fast in place. And that's a type of thing that's going to reduce your risk. You might also even look at like the technologies that you have applied there, because some technologies have a worse track record than others. They tend to be older, more pervasive technologies as well. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. I have a ton of fun diving into this stuff and exploring and getting to share it as well.
Yeah. One of the things I tell my students all the time is that the difference between marketing and bad actor social engineering is absolutely nothing. They're the exact same thing.
Very small window. Yeah. And I came from a marketing background at a point in my career. Like I've always been technical. But yeah, I spent time as like a BPM marketing CMO role. Um, and yeah, to me, I'm like, oh wow, this is basically just the marketing stack. And then you're throwing some exploits. And then you're trying to get a ransom. It's criminal activity. That's the predominant difference. Extortion, not good. And so I think people just need to be more mindful and understanding of that. Like you probably could take a look at the marketing tech stack and like to better understand how these actors move. And I for myself, like I've always theorized too, like actually marketing people in the tech stack might be the best that translate to security analysts. Because that's the work they're targeting, like who can I market to, who's going to buy my product. Like it's the same questions, but instead it's like who can I target, who has enough money to pay a ransom. Like the questions are translatable between marketing and cyber criminal ransomware operators. So
Yeah, that leads me to my next question. Is like this, we all hear often about the translation of tech into business speak. So you're often delivering uncomfortable truth, or, as Josh would say, unpopular opinions.
yeah.
um,
I felt that recently from some vendors.
So what have you learned about how leaders actually will receive this bad news versus how they actually want it delivered? Is there any tips or tricks that you could provide in that sense?
That's yeah. I mean, I've had some situations where maybe I stepped the line, um, you know, and so I think it's a balance of like, okay, being mindful that there's people on the other side. How do you showcase it in a way that is with the best intention. And so, yeah, I think security researchers generally struggle sometimes because a lot of times the people on the other side are hesitant to feedback. They also get a lot of information that is like bad or inaccurate, so they're dealing with trying to flush out like, is this real or is this not? There's a lot of noise, especially when you look at like bug bounty programs and vulnerability reporting. Like naturally with AI now, like there are people that are just making stuff up via Chat GPT, and they're not actually validating the work, and then they submit it. So there are some real challenging dynamics. But that is one of the aspects that like we started providing a report of vulnerability service for security researchers, because one of the some of the biggest challenges are like the software supplier has limited resources, so sometimes they're unresponsive. Sometimes there's just a lack of response from software vendors, it can be a lengthy process to go through disclosure of vulnerabilities and reporting them. And then there's a lot of like legal or policy concerns. And so naturally, it's like, well, how do you facilitate letting a researcher do what they do and offload all of that additional stuff that typically they're not good at? Not all of them, but like a lot of them, like they're like, dude, I found this 0-day. Like, you need to issue a patch today, and I'm gonna drop the code online, right? I'm not going to get into ethics in regards to like right or wrong. Oh, and I'm going to raise my hand to stop my camera moving. um, but I think there's this aspect of like taking some of that responsibility and onerous off the security researcher, so that they can go focus on research, right? And they can do the right things in regards to research, but helping have some help in regards to like mediation really can help them. So yeah, it's challenging. And I think for me, sometimes I'm recalibrating, like, hey, what do I want to share? How do I want to share the information? And sometimes it's better to let other people speak about it and let it come to fruition, and not always be the loudest one in the room. So it's a balancing act, definitely.
So we've kind of hit on this a little bit, but I want to dive in a little deeper. As security leaders, there are times that we realize that our prioritization model is completely flawed, but our organizations are optimized around that. So how do we address that?
Yeah, I really think it happens a top down, aspect in regards to, well, I would say like it can be bottoms up, but like you have to have buy-in from leadership. That's an absolute. And so I think, changing your goals and objectives and aligning them to things that are logical and make sense. Like, hey, if we know there's a vulnerability that has been having exploitation activity in the wild, like that probably should be close to the top of the list. If we see activity where there's a vulnerability in Metasploit, I kind of mentioned Metasploit being used by Black Basta, like we probably should put it on the top of the list of things we should remediate and fix. Like, oh, there's lots of POC code, or there's POC code around a vulnerability. Like that makes it easier for someone to go grab and potentially exploit some things. We should probably put that higher on the list. I think the technology side as well, like, oh, I have an edge device. It's connected to the internet. I have a CMS like WordPress. It's connected to the internet. I have a backup system that's commonly targeted by CLOP. I have a file transfer service on the internet. Like those are, regardless of which one you're using, they're commonly targeted. Like I probably should keep an eye on the security advisories. I probably should make sure there's other mitigating controls in place. I need to take that stuff really, really serious. And then wherever you can, using and leveraging automation so that these things remediate themselves. I think Chrome is a great example of that, where like, for the most part, Chrome just updates. Maybe you have to restart the browser, but like it doesn't require a change control window. Like we like the technology vendors also need to take some responsibility here and start modernizing to like automated remediation and less putting the onus on the consumer from a remediation standpoint. And so I think there's a lot of things, and we've seen there are a few network edge devices like Meraki is a great example, and I wish that Meraki was what became its potential. But I think a good example of like Meraki devices are network edge devices that just updated. Like you didn't have to put a change control window. You didn't have to apply a patch. Like it just happened. And those devices are still used out there, but I think like that technology needs to actually cross over to enterprise. And I think that's been a real challenge. That we haven't been able to modernize some of these really important areas that threat actors are hitting hard. And when I say we, I'm talking about the product vendors in software suppliers.
Yeah, that the automated remediation piece would have saved me and my teams a lot of strife, a lot of pain.
Yeah.
Um, so we we talk about, you know, like a global crisis. I know you weren't around for Log4j. That one just hits close to home for me. So,
Uh,
you know, but really since 2021, we've seen quite a few of these happen.
yeah.
When you're in that active crisis mode, how do you help your teams avoid burnout when they're asked to defend against this timeline that they have absolutely no control over? Things are changing constantly. There's just
Yeah.
a fire hose in every direction. So how do you help manage that?
I mean, I think that's a part of working in cybersecurity. So I think first off, it's like, yeah, like the threat actors aren't waiting, they're not waiting for you to get back from vacation. And so I think there's an unfortunate reality. I think having your well established process in place of what you're going to do when that happens, who's responsible, like how do you coordinate with other parts of the organization? Because ultimately those events are systemic, and so how do you operate and work with a leadership team? How do you work with legal? How do you work with your insurer? Because now insurance is a big component. Like if you don't have a plan, and I think most organizations are maturing to having a plan of what to do when they have a security incident. But genuinely, I think like a lot of this is on the planning side of it's not if but when, and having a plan in place to execute on of like what you do, and outline it to the best of your ability, and then once you learn when you have that incident, you reiterate on that and say, hey, let's do a root cause analysis in RCA. How did this go? What went well? What didn't go well? What could we do differently next time? And so I think the more organizations take that approach, the better they're going to get. But also, no one gets surprised. Like, hey, it's a matter of when, not if. Here's how we're going to go about this. Do we all agree on this approach? Right? Yep, we do. Okay, cool. We got buy-in. So it's when the next time something's happening, we're going to raise a red flag. Here's how we're going to communicate. Um, that's it really went from like business continuity, disaster recovery planning to like security incident planning.
Yeah.
And that was like, I don't know, business continuity and disaster recovery was like last decades, or maybe 2 decades ago,
Mm.
thing. I think it's the same. It's just different that it's like, oh, the disruption is not necessarily like your storage array going down. It's a threat actor that, takes out part of your infrastructure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about leadership and judgment and the weight that security teams carry. All that pressure comes from somewhere, and ultimately, a lot of times, it's where our assumptions meet the actual data. So let's talk about the work that you've been doing with VulnCheck, and specifically the state of exploitation report that you just did, because that's a lot of where those leadership failures actually start to make sense. So for the folks who are on this call who haven't seen your report, what problems are you trying to solve with the state of exploitation report that are existing vulnerability metrics that really just aren't answering?
Yeah, I think first off is understanding how quick, these vulnerabilities are being weaponized and used and exploited. And so, yeah, what we see, I think it was somewhere around like 29% of vulnerabilities that get exploited are being exploited um, at the time where an advisory becomes available or a CVE is published, right? And so naturally, what that tells me is like in your policy, like you have to be prepared for ensuring that you can get patches and remediation in place immediately for a subset of technologies and things. And that does mean that we saw SharePoint that got disclosed on a Saturday. I think it got added to SysACAV on a Sunday, the only SysACAV vulnerability on a Sunday. But yeah, that means that like you need people on call and they need to work weekends. Um, Like that's a, that's a real reality of things that you need to think about. And then there's a long tail of what I consider to be like vulnerabilities that are old that start getting exploited, or we find out they're being exploited. Um, and that more tells the story of vulnerability debt, in my opinion, than emerging threat. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is like, yes, also how do you reduce vulnerability debt? Automation is a great way to remediate the vulnerability debt. Like you have to be burning down vulnerability debt. Maybe that, if there's not threat components of exploitation, weaponized exploits, threat actors, that sort of stuff, then like that's where severity kind of plays into effect, or like something like an EPSS score. But yeah, I think you need to bucketize like emerging threats. You need to respond and take care of them very fast versus vulnerability debt, which is really how we've been approaching vulnerability management for the last 30 years. So that, that's kind of first. I also look at like where exploitation disclosure is coming from. And this is probably like, one of the things that is most interesting to me, because number one, my team and me spend a ton of time collecting vulnerability exploitation from hundreds of different sources. But also, I think it's important to acknowledge and recognize that exploitation disclosures largely come from security research organizations. Largely, they come from vendor advisories. Sometimes they come from government entities as well. But this kind of demonstrates like this is a global team effort. And that's something I continue to advocate too, is like the more we can provide comprehensive information to defenders. Like we have our VulnCheck Kev. We give it away for free because we believe it's the right thing to do, similar to how CISA gives theirs away. That provides an opportunity for people to like see the threat signal faster, quicker, and remediate. Um, you know, and then the next thing I looked at and explored was, hey, normally I would look at vendors, and so I did look at vendors, but I was being a little bit more mindful of this approach of like, okay, can I look at top targeted technologies opposed to vendors? And we could hop into the vendors of which ones are the best and worst and all that fun stuff. But I think this helps provide some visibility into, hey, when you're thinking about these processes and how I respond and how I mitigate and how I remediate, what things are actually the most targeted? And it's network edge devices, content management system, network edge devices like your ASAs or your Palo Alto Network Edge or your Fortinets or your Toto links or your TP links, or anything that's connected to the internet that's giving you connectivity, is a huge target. Content management systems like WordPress or Joomla or a vast amount of things, right? And most of the time, like those are more used for like command and control infrastructure, I would say, or like botnets, right? Than probably necessarily early stage attack types of things. But but also there's a long tail of things like virtualization, backups, email systems, server software, file sharing that get targeted. That like are very focused. There's not a ton of you know things being used, but when they do get used, like a move it or like a progress move it or a crush FTP, like they're pervasive. They're very wide impacting. And so that those are the things I observe from a top technology perspective. The browser side is interesting because like I think Chrome is a good example. Like the world edges Chrome. Like there's not a whole lot of threat activity on browsers these days as far as things being exploited, and those genuinely are being remediated fast. So over time, it seems like the days of like Internet Explorer getting owned left and right during the teens, like that seems to be less of an issue because we've moved to automated remediation and hardening by Google and the Chrome team. And then I looked at like, hey, is there much difference of the exploitation timelines on the different technologies? This is interesting, but there's also a lot of bias because like some of the technologies have less vulnerabilities and some have a lot more. So that's going to create some bias on timelines. But how quickly, like operating systems tend to disclose exploitation at the time of advisory. So, making sure you have automated patching for Windows and Linux and Mac are incredibly important. I think a lot of people have moved to automation on those things, which is good as well, but certainly an area that's top targeted. And then probably the other thing I would say is well, two things, and then I'll move to ransomware. One thing, and then I'll move to ransomware. The timeline in the report when I overlaid 2025 and 2024 is very, very close. And so I think this just shows like the maturity and consistency in threat actors targeting vulnerabilities that like, hey, it's now incredibly predictable. Like we're probably going to see the same exact chart in 2026. And that's towards the bottom of the report. But if you look at those lines, like you don't get any closer than those two lines when you're looking at completely different year data sets. And so I think that just shows the persistence and activity, the maturity of known exploited vulnerabilities being publicly known, which is all good for defenders. Sorry, my camera's acting up today. Yeah. Before I hop to ransomware, though, like because I was in the report a little bit as well. Like any questions about that stuff?
Well, I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
What there's so much. I'm just trying to think of what we can like something tangible that folks can walk away with. So we talked
Yes.
about, the CVE and the Kev lists, but there are defenders that are still getting caught off guard. So
yeah,
do you have like 2 or 3 signals that defenders might be missing if they're only relying on these CVE or Kev lists? Like, is there anything top of mind to you, perhaps from your report? Because I will admit I am one that has not read it yet.
No, that's fine. Well, I think first off, decoupling and realizing that like CVE is different than disclosure, and sometimes they're not one-to-one at the same time. We all wish they could be, and we're a big advocate that they should be. We do a lot of CVE issuance ourselves of like issuing vulnerabilities for things being exploited in the wild that don't have a CVE, or maybe the vendor didn't even disclose or patch yet. And so those are real realities. But yeah, if I'm looking at it from a perspective of the consumer, right, and the security practitioner, first off, understand what technology is in your technology stack.
Oh, you mean they have to have an inventory? The first 2 things on the
Okay.
CIS list.
Yeah, like I'm not gonna say you have to have an inventory. Like you should, but like I think we get too caught on like, oh, we need an inventory of everything, and then we don't focus on the things we already know. So
that is very
the first thing is like, okay, rather than trying to boil the ocean, start with what you know. Like what technologies are in your environment, list them out. Not gonna call it an inventory. Okay.
fair.
Do you understand how they disclose vulnerabilities? Do you actually pay attention to when they disclose vulnerabilities? Is there any way to automate remediation of those vulnerabilities? If there's not a way to remediate, what is your process to ensure the update happens effectively in time? So
You mean it's not just Patch Tuesday?
no. I mean, yeah, Microsoft is great, Patch Tuesday, but like there's tons of auto cycle stuff. And a lot of other vendors do Patch Tuesday as well, but like you have to spend some time in understanding how disclosures actually happen, and most of the time the auto cycle disclosures are the ones being exploited. And so like, yeah, if you're only doing Patch Tuesday and you ignore everything else and then you patch everything next Tuesday, you're leaving a huge window of opportunity for threat actors. Yeah, the second thing I would say from a signal perspective, like CISA and what they do with Kev is great, but I would say like grab VulnCheck Kev. It's free. You can go to vulncheck.com/Kev. There's 2 things I would say in there. That's going to be, I don't know, 4,500 vulnerabilities that have been known to be exploited in the wild. They all have evidence, so you can see who sourced it if you want to trust it or not. That's really something important for us is like, hey, don't trust us. Here's the source information. Like, you should be able to understand whether you want to trust it or not. And you might trust different sources differently, from a disclosure perspective. But what I would say, whether you're doing SysCev or VulnCheck or whatever other Kev data, the second thing I would look at are what are ransomware campaigns and ransomware actors actually using, and I would focus there. Because, like, if you can understand what vulnerabilities are being targeted by ransomware and used that are technologies in your environment, well, that's a good place. You want to spend time on going back to what technologies you have and ensuring you outline, this is our policy. This is how we're actually mitigating, um, what controls we have in place, and how we're ensuring that we prevent someone from exploiting the technology. And ultimately, if you have a technology and you keep on going through the same incidences over and over and over again, you might also want to consider whether you switch to a different technology.
Mhm.
I'm not going to call out any vendors, but they're even some of the insurers are starting to come out and say, hey, we're considering not insuring people that use these technologies because they continue to get owned, and they're not, and most of them are security products, by the way. And so I think that's a real reality to think about as well, as far as like tangible things you can do that are pretty simple to start, and then maybe go back and be like, okay, yeah, let's now try and build a bigger inventory. um, I bet a bunch of IT organizations and security teams didn't even know they had progress movement in their environment
Mm.
when that incident happened. Like that, I think that one is a really, really, good example of a technology that might be hanging out there that you might not know is in your environment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, like, don't try and boil the ocean. And someone mentioned too, a joke about, oh, we just need more dashboards. Yeah, I think sometimes people spend time in the wrong places of trying to focus on perfection over good enough. I would encourage people to, like, yeah, take action on the things you can do and you control and you can fix. But it's really hard to control something you don't have information or don't know. And you can build projects around those longer term, but I would not let that come at the cost of the shorter term either.
So if we take the data that you presented and we accept the fact that defenders really don't control the timeline anymore, a lot of times the exploit's going to happen before we even know that it's exploitable. What's a first technical control or process that you think that as a defender that we should implement, because now we don't control the timeline anymore?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it depends on the technology, right? Like operating systems, we have EDR. You don't have EDR on a network device. And so it's like, okay, well, oh man, we have SSL VPN hanging out there. That stuff's getting owned a lot. Like, maybe we want to modernize, or maybe we want to start removing services that tend to get exploited often and putting other controls in place. So I do think that, like, to some extent, it's on a technology by technology basis. You have to look at these things, to say, like, okay, what controls aren't, like FTP, good example. Like, is there another control that I can put in front of the FTP service, from a security perspective, to reduce my exposure from an internet perspective? And so I think more or less, like, yes, you should be thinking more. I don't have a silver bullet. I think if we had one answer to that question, I think, like, we wouldn't have this problem. But I do think that, like, you have to spend the time to analyze and think about, like, okay, what controls could be in place for this use case, that are going to reduce my risk overall, especially when these things are coming super fast and often being exploited. And I think in some cases, like, you have no control. Like, there's things being exploited for months before a vendor disclosure and a patch comes out.
Yeah.
And that's a really tough situation. Like, there might not be anything you can do other than shut down a service, or put another control in front of it and look for IOCs. Like, you might want to be looking through your logs to do detection to see if something like that is being used or has been used. And so yeah, that's some of the things I think just to think about. It's not easy, but those are some controls that will certainly help. And even on the IOC side and detection side, it's like, well, if you know something bad happened, at least you can do something about it. Like pull an IR firm in if you don't have
Yeah.
resources. Like pull a third party in that you can go to. I assume you guys might provide some level of services like that where you can help, or people that can. But I do think that sometimes people are resistant to getting help, and it's like, yes, get a contract in place with an IR firm.
Yeah.
Like you should have that before you get breached.
You
Yes.
mean the first time I talk to my IR firm and lawyer should be before I get breached? That's
Uh,
crazy.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So when you look ahead to 2026 and beyond, do you think that we're going to be heading towards fewer but faster exploits, or just more noise at a higher speed?
I think more noise at a higher speed, and when I say more noise, the introduction of noise is largely what I'm seeing is now you have AI tools that enable people that weren't able to do the things that uh, sophisticated actors can do, but they can't validate the stuff. And so I have a concept that I just created recently where the script kitty is now becoming the vibe code kitty. And I think we're going to see a lot. I think we're going to see a lot of activity increasing. We already are seeing this on the exploit side where people are publishing public exploits that don't work and aren't valid, that were generated by like Claude or ChatGPT or Anthropic, right?
Mm.
Because like they're like, hey, go to build this thing, and it looks legit to them. It's not tested, it's not validated. They publish it. I think we're just gonna see this concept of like the vibe code kitty, where like some of them are successful, but it's gonna create a lot of noise for everyone on the defender side. And so that's where I think we're going to see a lot of noise come from. And I just think the existing threat activity is going to continue to increase. There's geopolitical reasons for that as well that have been increasing that
Yeah.
we need to be mindful of. And so I think that's the reality in 2026 and on.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point with the vibe coding script kiddie, because we've already seen with Anthropic where they found a threat actor that was largely using fully automated AI enabled threat attacks. So we're going
Yeah.
to keep seeing that over and over and over again
Yeah.
because it's just an easy tool to use.
Yeah. And we see that like on the reported vulnerability side, it's like, oh, come on, dude. Like you just submitted something directly from ChatGPT. So we have to ask questions now, like, did you use AI to, for this research? And maybe some people will fill it out accurately, but yeah, I think bug bounty programs are inundated with that. You hear that publicly from a lot of
Mhm.
different organizations and entities, but also people are throwing exploits or publishing exploits publicly as well. Um, Similarly, which is just going to contribute to the noise. And my camera is awful today.
I'm really interested in your bottle of water that's sitting on your couch.
Oh yeah.
Um,
But
so
it
we,
did give you a really good view of your skate ramp. So, that's
yeah,
always
it's
Yeah,
good.
true.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I
it's
have a
pretty
full
cool.
half pipe now. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, it's sweet.
when you're bored in meetings, you just turn off your camera and do that, don't you? Just write it.
Yeah.
So we always end Criticality Live with like a core set of questions, the ones that give our audience those practical take it with you insights that they can use straight away. So I'm going to ask you, Patrick, if you could fix one thing about the cybersecurity industry overnight, what would it be?
Oh man, overnight, you know? Um, yeah, I mean, the one thing that I lived MFA, and I think there's a hesitancy in this industry to apply modern technology and security controls. And I look at a technology like U2F and hardened credentials like that, and it's like, if everyone just implemented that today, like it's a good example of so many of the phishing problems and credential compromise problems would just go away. And now the threat actors would have to move and figure out other techniques and tactics. But yeah, I would say like reducing our hesitancy to modernize to stronger security controls would be the biggest thing I would change.
I like that.
Complacency.
Oh, Josh, you're on mute.
The double secret triple mute. So keeping on that thread, what's a practice, technical or culture, that you wish that we would just stop doing in cybersecurity immediately, like yesterday?
Culture. I think we talk a lot about new frameworks, compliance, process, and that's not a bad thing, but I think like we over engineer the complexity of what needs to get done, and it is complicated. But like just do the basics, like some fundamental, things, fundamental controls, modernization. From a culture perspective, I just think like we talk about things a lot, but we don't take action quick enough. And so I would just say like, yeah, taking action and changing things and modernizing them would be the biggest thing I'd like to see from a culture perspective.
You mean I shouldn't still be using things like SMBV version 1?
No.
Man.
So for our listeners who want to follow your work or reach out with any questions, what's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, LinkedIn, Patrick M. Garrity. I have a GitHub repo, Patrick M. Garrity, with a lot of my research, and then VulnCheck.com/blog is where a lot of my research is published for work. And then there's also a hidden site, research.vulncheck.com, that I maintain as well. All secrets.
So now I'm going to be reading that all afternoon. So before we let you go, any final thoughts that you want to leave our audience on cybersecurity leadership, building teams, research for 26 and beyond?
Yeah. I would say the biggest opportunity is to work on, even myself, like communication skills. How do you talk to executives? How do you talk across organizations? Like the biggest thing I see is an opportunity to actually sit on the ground floor with other people. Like, you have someone that is a developer, you're telling them to go fix something, but you've never actually sat down with them to understand what their process is, what they're developing, what the thing actually does. Like, go grab lunch with that person and you will learn a ton, and you'll build a relationship, and it will make your life so much easier to like get stuff done. So I would pick like your biggest 5 problem people. Like, oh man, it's so hard to work with this person. Like they never fix anything. I would just go get uncomfortable, like buy them lunch or breakfast, fly out to wherever they are, and build a relationship with them, and likely that's going to help you understand, why there's this, and hopefully like, make it a little bit easier on your life.
Totally.
That's great. I like that. Yeah, I really like that. That's solid. Thank you for that. Well, hey, that's a wrap on the Criticality Live. Huge thanks to our guest, Patrick Garrity, and an even bigger thanks to all of you for hanging out with us. Yeah, and being a part of this growing community of leaders who are done with the buzzwords and ready for real conversations. If you got value out of today's episode, please hit that follow button, share it with us to hear it, and drop us a review here on LinkedIn, Spotify, or on the on-demand YouTube channel. It helps us way more than you know. And of course, a huge shout out to our sponsor, Secure Nation, for powering this conversation. They're helping organizations defend smarter, respond faster, and make cybersecurity something that actually works. So go check out. And this has been Criticality Live, where we cut through the noise and get to what really matters. See you next time. Bye, everyone.
Take care.